Okay, so we can begin with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then we do the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And today is November 6th, 2021. And we are continuing now with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours. And we're pulling into the home stretch with sutta number 186. I'll be trying to cover a few suttas today, which cover a wide range of topics. And so sutta number 186 is a dialogue between a monk who comes to the Buddha and asks some questions and the Buddha's replies. So let us see what we can make out of this sutta. Okay, so we have 4 questions that the monk is going to ask, which is why the sutta is included in the Book of Fours. So the first question, actually there are 3 questions here, but they're grouped together as one under one heading. So the monk asks, by what is the world led? By what is the world dragged around? And what is it that when it arises, it puts the world under its control? So what is it that controls the world? So today, especially over the last 100 years or so, there's a kind of philosophy which is called philosophical materialism. And this is different from sort of psychological materialism. Psychological materialism means that one is concerned mainly with acquiring material goods, consumer item, with consumption, with acquiring a lot of commodities and possessions, and just thinks in terms of money and wealth. That's psychological materialism. But philosophical materialism is sort of the opposite of idealism. Philosophical materialism, which has been in a way promoted by those who reflect on developments in modern science, take that the fundamental reality of the world, of the universe, is matter. That the world essentially consists of material particles or material processes which undergo various combinations, permutations, forming constellations. And then out of these permutations, combinations of matter, everything else emerges, including mind and consciousness. So from this perspective, which is also quite dominant in neurology or in the neurosciences, the brain and the nervous system are the fundamental material realities, and mind or consciousness and mental processes are just byproducts. Maybe even some will say chance byproducts of these material processes. Yeah, in the world of philosophy, in metaphysics, there's a term, for this understanding of the mind. The word is an epiphenomenon, which means epi is external on this or on the surface, just like we refer to the outer layer of the skin is the epidermis. And so epi means on the outside. And of course, we all know phenomenon, just something that manifests. And so on this understanding, the mind is an epiphenomenon of matter, that it's just a kind of surface manifestation of material configurations of particles of matter. And in the case of the human body, of the nervous system, brain tissue, and so forth, these have emerged through biological evolution, and part of the evolutionary process. First, very simple mental processes emerge, and then as these mental capacities become more complex, more sophisticated, something arises called consciousness. And the big problem facing all the philosophical materialists who build upon the discoveries of biology is, how does one explain consciousness or mind on the basis of matter? They're just so different that it's hard to understand the relationship. So for the strict materialist, their position is called reductionism, which means one reduces mind or consciousness to the configurations of matter. And this is a kind of consequence of philosophical materialism. So if the fundamental reality is matter and material processes, then mind has to be explained as a byproduct of matter. And so when you have any kind of consciousness, any kind of mental activity, you reduce those mental activity to some hidden, obscure feature of the nervous system, of the brain and the nervous system. So if you want to understand sight, for example, I see the screen in front of me, then you would look for certain regions of the brain that can perfectly explain my act of seeing the computer screen. If I hear sound, let us say I hear a melody and I identify that melody as a particular song, let's say the Rolling Stones are singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," okay, as they've been singing for the last month or so here in the US. So then I understand that hearing the sounds and interpreting the sounds as a particular song, in terms I search to identify that with certain events taking place in the brain and nervous system. So I reduce my act of hearing and identifying to certain processes taking place in the brain. And similarly, when I'm thinking, even developing the most elaborate thoughts, developing, maybe I'm studying the theory of quantum mechanics or relativity theory, or reading the Abhidhamma, trying to understand the Abhidhamma, all of these acts of thinking, pondering, again, can be reduced to activities in the brain. So this is reductionism. And an alternative theory is dualism, which takes matter and mind to be two separate entities, neither of which can be reduced to the other, but each is a fundamental reality. But the problem facing the philosophers is, how do you explain the relationship between matter and mind? How is it that matter can give rise to consciousness or mind? And how is it that mind can act upon matter? For example, in my thought, I formulate the intention, let me hold up my hand, and then I perform the act of holding up the hand. So that is dualism. Okay, the Buddha's position is also a kind of dualism, at least in early Buddhism, in that we have mental activities, we have citta and ceitasikas on one side, or we have the four mental aggregates on one side, and then we have rupa, or the aggregate of material form, on the other side. So early Buddhism does take a kind of dualism of consciousness and mind and material phenomena. And through its system of conditional relations, it explains the relationships between mind and matter. And I'll be going into some of that next weekend when we have the Abhidhamma program, particularly on Sunday. I'll be going through some of the conditional relations. But between the two, matter and mind, because Buddhism is a system of spiritual training aimed at liberation, it gives primary emphasis to the mind. And so when the monk asks this question, he's trying to figure out or to find out what it is that underlies and governs all of the significant things that go on in the world. And so first the Buddha praises the monk for asking this question. It's a bit unusual for the Buddha to praise the question in this way, but he says, excellent, excellent monk, your acumen, that is your kind of intelligence, is excellent. Your discernment is excellent. Your inquiry is a good one. Then he repeats the question. And then he gives the answer, his answer. He says, the world is led by the mind. It is dragged around by the mind. That's a rather strong expression. Let's get the Pali for this. Yachitena parikasati. So I translate the by mind, the world is dragged around. But this word parikasati is related, of course, it's a augmented form of the verb kasati, and kasati refers to the process by which when a farmer is plowing the field, then that act of plowing, what the farmer is doing is kasati, so he's pulling the plow or pushing the plow through the field, or actually usually the plow is attached to some bulls, some ox, and the ox move, pulling the plow across the field. And so it's like just as the ox dragged the plow across the field, so mind, the world is dragged by the mind. And then it's the mind that has everything under its control. So I think this is speaking not so much at the metaphysical level, the relationship of mind and matter, but in terms of, you could say, of the significance of things that go on in the world. So just if we raise like the inquiry, like what's going on today, and this is quite, I mean, quite an interesting development, maybe not foreseen by the Buddha. So today, the major crisis facing the entire world, the entire human population, is climate change. So we're pumping more and more of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The planet is warming up because of the heating up of the Earth's surface, because of the heating up of the atmosphere of the Earth. We have more violent hurricanes, more intense storms, heavier downpours of rain in the certain parts of the country, very severe wildfires burning up large tracts of wild forest. We have extended heat waves, areas being that had been previously quite habitable, quite conducive to human flourishing, and now becoming inhabitable. Mass migrations when agricultural land dries up and turns into barren fields and deserts. So where do we locate this? We can't blame it all just on changes in the atmosphere and the weather, but these changes are taking place. The ultimate cause is the mind, because we've shifted to an industrial model of production and even industrial agriculture. So we extract the energy of the sun stored in the earth in the form of petroleum and natural gas and coal. We burn it, the planet heats up, and all of these disasters take place, even to the point now where geophysicists say that we are making a transition. Previously, the epoch in which the geological era in which we were living was called the what is it called? The Haliocene. Haliocene, that is the epoch in which conditions on Earth are determined primarily by the heat of the sun. The sun is burning at a sufficient intensity so that human societies can flourish in many ways. But now we're making this shift. I think it's Haliocene. And now we're shifting to they're called the, is it Anthropocene or Anthropocene? So now we're entering the geological era in which human activity, anthropo, is determining conditions on Earth. And so where do all of those human activities that condition the situation on Earth come from? Come from the mind. So this is one illustration of how it's mind that leads the world, that mind that drags the world around. But so many other spheres of significance for people, for human beings, ultimately stem from the mind. So we have, from time to time, we have in the economy, periods of inflation, periods of recession, sometimes depressions. All of those come from human economic activity. We have wars and peace accords come from human activity. We have beneficial social systems, harmful social systems, all come from human activity rooted in the mind. And so we could see all of this sort of laid down by the Buddha even such a long time ago. For example, in the Dhammapada, the first two verses in the Dhammapada, quite significant that the compilers of the Dhammapada put these verses at the very beginning of this collection. So probably many of you know these verses. Mano pubangama dhamma, mano seta, mano maya. So all conditions, we could say, have mind as their leader, mind as their chief. They are made by the mind, fabricated by the mind. So if one speaks or acts with a corrupted mind, then suffering follows, just as the wheel follows the foot of the ox. And then the second verse, the first couplet is the same. Then it continues. Okay, so conditions are led by the mind. Mind is the chief. They are made by the mind. If one speaks or acts with a peaceful or wholesome mind, then happiness follows, just like the shadow that doesn't depart. Yeah, then there's an interesting sutta that comes later in the Anguttara Nikaya, which actually explains how, in a sense, even the different realms of existence, according to the Buddhist cosmology, the different realms of existence are themselves grounded in the mind, sort of governed by the mind. So in this sutta, this is the Book of Sixes, Sutta number 39, the Buddha says first that there are three causes for the arising of karma. What are the three? Greed, these are the unwholesome karma, greed, hatred, and delusion. And so these are three factors of the mind. In technical terms, we call them three chaitasikas, mental factors, or the three akusala mula, the unwholesome roots. And then it is through these unwholesome roots that there arises karma. This would be actions of body, speech, and thought. And because of karma originating from greed, hatred, and delusion, the hells, the animal realm, and the sphere of the pretas, the afflicted spirits, become manifest. So the three bad destinations are rooted in or spring from unwholesome karma, rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. And unwholesome karma springs from the mind. Then on the opposite side, the Buddha says that there are three other causes for the arising of karma. These are the three wholesome roots: non-greed or generosity, non-hatred, this would be love, loving kindness, and non-delusion or wisdom. And then it's through these good roots, wholesome roots, that one engages in various activities that create karma. And it's because of the karma born of non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion that the happy destinations become manifest. That is the heavenly realms for the devas and the human realm and any other good destinations. These arise from karma, wholesome activities of body, speech, and mind. And those wholesome activities originate from non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, or generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. And those good roots originate from the mind. So in that way, we could say that the mind is at the center of the entire wheel of samsaric existence. On the lower part of the wheel, we have the bad destinations, the hells, the animal realm, the preta realm. On the upper half of the wheel of birth and death, we have the good destinations, the human realm, the heavenly realm. And then even beyond the heavens, we have the nibbana or nirvana. And then at the center, which the focal point from which all of these realms emerge, is the mind with its activity generating karma. And so in another sutta, this is in the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 22, Sutta 100, the Buddha says that one should often reflect upon one's own mind thus, that for a long time this mind has been defiled by lust or greed, hatred, and delusion. And then through the defilements of the mind, living beings are defiled. And then by purifying the mind of these defilements, beings are purified. Yeah, and the way karma creates all of these different realms of existence. Here, the Buddha uses a simile to illustrate this. It's like an artist, a painter, who might take paints of different colors and might paint a figure of a person on a piece. It would be a piece of, actually, yeah, a piece of canvas or on a plank of wood or a wall. And so when we create karma, then that karma will create in future lives the being that we will become, consisting of the 5 aggregates. And so just as the painter paints the picture, so our mind creates the karma that will construct our own individual identity as we go from one life to the next. And so for this reason, the Buddha says that it is mind that leads the world, and the world is dragged around by the mind. So much misery and suffering in the world today. Sometimes when I read the news, it's just so devastating. Like what is going on in Ethiopia, the Tigray region, where the main Ethiopian forces imposed a blockade on Tigray region, so that I think hundreds and thousands of people were reduced almost to starvation. What is this happening through? Not just through impersonal forces, but this is human activity. And then we think of all of the devastation of the 20th century, the Nazi death camps, the Stalinist concentration camps, the World War I, World War II, the Cold War, Vietnam War, wars in Korean War, and so on. And then all of the little minor conflicts that don't get recorded in the history books. All of this is coming from the mind. Okay, so that is the first question. Then we can come to the second question. Just clear my throat. Yeah, so with this question, the monk is asking, he uses the phrase, it must have been a phrase that was in circulation in the period, a learned expert on the Dhamma, a learned expert on the Dhamma. How is one a learned expert on the Dhamma? Yeah, the Pali expression here used for learned is bahu sutto, which literally means one who has heard much. Because in the Buddha's time, we didn't have printed books. There were no printed books that would have, you have the published translations of the Nikayas that you can order online or go to a bookshop and buy them, or even go to a library to read them. Not possible in the Buddha's time. So the way you have to learn the Dhamma is by going to listen to Dhamma discourses. And so there would be monks who would specialize in learning the Dhamma. And so whenever the Buddha is giving a discourse, these would be a group of monks usually under the leadership of Venerable Ananda, who would specialize in listening intently to these suttas and memorizing them, and then passing them on from one to the other through a process of oral transmission and memorization. So one comes to be called Bahu Sutto, which means Bahu is a lot and Sutto is heard. So one who is heard a lot is learned. And then Dhammadaro is, Dara means one who maintains, who supports, who preserves. So one who preserves the Dhamma. And so there's a kind of standard definition of one who is learned. Let me see if I could find that elsewhere. No, I'm not finding it here. Hmm. Anyway, the standard definition goes for a monk who is learned is he has heard many of the teachings, retains them in mind, recites them orally, examines the meaning, and penetrates them with view, with insight. So the key point is there that the usual definition speaks about the learned monk or nun as one who has listened to many teachings. But in this sutta, interestingly, first the Buddha says, I have taught many teachings. Then he mentions 9 categories of teachings. There are discourses, and then there's suttas and mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired utterances, quotations, Jataka stories, accounts of miraculous events, and then questions and answers. But then the Buddha says, after learning the meaning and the Dhamma of even a 4-line verse, if one practices correctly in accordance with the Dhamma, that is enough for this person to be called a learned expert on the Dhamma. So this is a kind of ironical definition of one who has learned much. In this case, you don't have to have listened to many, many teachings, but even if you hear just a 4-line verse, if you practice correctly, that is enough to be called a learned expert in the Dhamma. And this agrees with another verse that occurs in the Dhammapada, or a pair of verses. This is verses 19 and 20, which again might be familiar to many of you. So verse 19 says, even if one can recite many texts, but one doesn't practice accordingly, but instead one is negligent or heedless, then it is just like a person, a cowherd, who counts the cows of others. So the cows are not his own, but the cows belong to his neighbor. So he counts the cows, but he can't say, those are my cows. And so in this way, one doesn't partake of the life of a true renunciant. But then verse 20 says, even if one recites just a little bit of the sacred literature, of the sacred teaching, but if one practices accordingly, in accordance with the Dhamma, if one is practicing to abandon lust, hatred, and delusion, and one has right understanding and a pure mind, then one partakes of the life of an ascetic, of a renunciant. Okay, so here the Buddha is praising one who practices in accordance with the teaching, even if they don't learn much, but even if they learn just a little bit, but if they practice accordingly, they can be called one who has learned much. Of course, they've taken the essence of the teaching. Okay, then the third question is going somewhat deeper now. So let's get the phrase used in the Pali. Okay, so here the phrase used is in English, it's the monk is asking, how, in what way can one be called learned, knowledgeable? So this would be enough. If it's just learned, that would be in agreement with the previous question. But now he adds another phrase, nibedika panyo, which I translate as of penetrative wisdom. I think if you look at the word, you could see here, panyo is from panya, wisdom, and this wisdom is described as nibedika, which comes from actually a verb, vedati, which means to pierce, like shooting an arrow through a target. And then the prefix near gives it some more intensity, like it's not simply piercing, but piercing through. And then in Pali, when you get an RV combination, it turns into a double B. So it's the wisdom that pierces through, you could say pierces through the dark cloud of delusion and sees the liberating truth. And so the Buddha repeats the question. First, he repeats the question and praises the monk. Then he gives the answer. Here a monk has heard, this is dukkha, this is the origin of dukkha, it's the cessation of dukkha, this is the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. And in each case, he sees the meaning of this. Or actually, it's more than just the meaning as an intellectual apprehension, but it's a sort of seeing the essence of it, the reality behind the words, having pierced through it with wisdom. Yeah, I put the Pali in here. So we have with wisdom, panyaya. He sees, that's pasati, he sees the meaning, but the word atta has a stronger, broader, deeper sense than the English word meaning. So it's not just grasping the meaning intellectually, but seeing the essence of the matter. And he sees it with ati vija, which is also from the same verb. This is from the same verb vedati, but with the prefix ati. Ati gives the sense more of going beyond, or excessive. So having pierced it right through, he sees it. And this is a kind of code expression indicating a disciple at a particular level of attainment. Could anybody identify what is intended here? A
Stream
disciple,
entry.
exactly. So it's one at the minimal level of stream entry. Could be stream enterer, once returner, or non-returner. One at the level of the three lower stages of realization. So they see directly the Four Noble Truths with wisdom, penetrating it with wisdom. So they haven't reached they haven't reached the goal pointed to by the teaching, but they see the truth, and now they're irreversible, and they can arrive, they're bound to arrive at the final stage. Okay, then the fourth question is, so now it's sort of going up to the next level. So the monk is asking, he uses the expression, a wise person of great wisdom. And again, let us get the Pali terms used. Because there are actually two different words here, but we have a shortage of English words representing wisdom. So the original Pali has pandito, well, this is in the stem form, pandita. So that's what I render a wise person. And nowadays, the word pundit has taken on quite a different meaning. In traditional Indian culture, the word pundit usually means a learned person, like a person who would know maybe the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Shastras, and who has like completed the course. I'm not sure whether it's restricted to Brahmins, but would be one who has mastered the body of Brahminical learning. But it suggests the idea of being highly learned. But now in Western culture, or at least in English culture, we have the word pundit, which is derived from the Pali Sanskrit pandita, which now takes on almost a derogatory tone. It's like a news commentator who's sort of knowledgeable about the inside story, what's going on in Washington, who is conniving with who in order to get the better of this political group. So the sort of the political comment, the word pundit has come to take on the meaning of a political commentator, but that's quite far from the original meaning in Indian culture. But then we have the other word, the one or the other expression of great wisdom, that's mahapanyo. So one who has great panya. So this is sort of a development beyond having penetrating wisdom, as in the previous question, penetrative wisdom. Now he's asking about the person of great wisdom. And by implication, this is no doubt it's referring to the Arahant. So he's asking about, in effect, like, how do we understand the arahant? Again, the Buddha praises the monk for asking the question. And the answer is a bit surprising, since normally one would expect the definition or the explanation of the arahant to be, here with the destruction of the asavas, a monk enters and dwells in the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, attained through the destruction of the asavas. So that's the sort of the stock expression of the arhat. But here we have a somewhat different definition. Here the Buddha says, a wise person of great wisdom does not intend or does not act for his own affliction, his own harm, or for the harm of others, or for the harm of both. Rather, when he thinks, he, he thinks only of his own welfare, the welfare of others, the welfare of both, and the welfare of the whole world. Yeah, so this is, I think, describing that the liberated person, the arhat, sometimes they're depicted in some of the, call it the polemical Buddhist literature, particularly from some of the Mahayana texts, as being narrow-minded or just rather not selfish, but individually concerned with their own liberation. But here the Buddha describes the arhat as being one who thinks, well, first, of course, they have to be concerned for their own welfare, but then they're concerned with also with the welfare of others and the welfare of the whole world. And then to further support this, I did a little search in the Iti Vuttaka. I found a passage. What did I preserve it? Where the Buddha describes the arhats as, he calls them, teachers, caravan leaders, dispellers of darkness, bringers of light, makers of radiance, luminaries, torchbearers, bringers of illumination, noble ones possessed of vision. And then there's another sutta in the Iti Vuttaka. I should have kept it. Where the Buddha says that there are three persons. Is the size enough? How is the type size?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, we can make it another. Yeah, this should be good. Okay, the Buddha says here, this is Iti Vuttaka, one of the smaller books in the Anguttara Nikaya, number 84. He says that there are these three persons who arise in the world for the welfare of many people, for the happiness of many people, out of compassion for the world, for the good welfare and happiness of devas and human beings. What are the three? So the first is the Buddha himself, the Tathagata, and he teaches the Dhamma that's good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. And then the second person who appears for the welfare of the world is the Arahant, whose taints are destroyed and so on, who is completely released through final knowledge. He too teaches, or she teaches the Dhamma that's good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. And then the third person or type of person that appears in the world for the welfare of many is a disciple of the Buddha, who is a learner, one in training, who is still following the path, who has learned much and of virtuous conduct. And this one also teaches the Dhamma that's good in the beginning, good in the end, good in the middle, good in the end. And then the verse says, these three are chief among devas and human beings. They are illuminators. They open the door to the deathless, and they free many people from bondage. Okay, so that should take care of sutta number 186. So now we can see if we have any questions, if anybody has any questions. And you ask the question by clicking the hand icon. Okay, so we see Henry. Henry, okay, maybe he didn't have a question. Okay, next is John.
Hello, Bhante. Thank you
Yeah.
for your time and your teaching. A lot of respect to you. In the sutta, it mentions about a wise person thinking in terms of the welfare of the whole world. And I wonder how such a person would react to the challenges we face today. Thank you, Bhante.
I think that would be maybe too big a question to answer in detail. But I would say that certainly a person who has reached the stage of maybe arhat would think that the best way to respond to some of the challenges we face today would be to promote, I would say, the kind of values that lie at the heart of the Dhamma. This would be the values of having concern for the well-being and happiness of many people, and then trying to find like what are the right kinds of social and economic and political policies that would be conducive to the welfare of the world. It's not that the Arhat is going to be a specialist in economics and politics, but at least he would maybe try to advocate the need or emphasize the need to listen to the true experts in that area and not to be instruct people not to be carried away by disinformation, misinformation, distorted information, but to listen carefully and reflect on the difference in programs and policies and the candidates advocating these different policies, and to choose those candidates that seem to be knowledgeable and honest and truly dedicated to the welfare of people, rather than those who are egotists just out for their own power and wealth. Yeah, in brief, that would be the way I would treat that question. Okay, next is Sud.
Thank you, Bhante, for your excellent teaching. My question is, how does practicing in line with the Dhamma actually and penetrating with wisdom translate to practicing while engaged in regular daily activity, given that especially in lay life, majority of the time is spent in activity outside of meditation, especially in a busy life of a lay person, even when you're engaged in wholesome activities, you're fairly busy.
Yeah, okay, so I would say that, especially in the case of a layperson, to practice in accordance with the Dhamma, one shouldn't conceive that in a rather narrow and exclusive way, that you're sitting in your meditation seat, formally practicing meditation. But we could say that of course, that should be part of one's regular routine if one is serious about advancing along the path. But one should also sort of bring Dhamma practice into one's involvement in one's everyday activities. And just to deal very briefly with this, what I would say is a good model for this, a sort of a good source text for how to practice the Dhamma in everyday activities would be the Mangala Sutta or the Mahamangala Sutta, which enumerates like 38 so-called mangalas or blessings, in which the great majority are concerned with everyday life, practicing the Dhamma in everyday life. And this includes also fulfilling one's responsibilities to one's family, in the case of children, to their parents, in the case of parents, to their children, responsibilities to one's relatives and friends, earning a living by right livelihood, and then observing precepts and trying to develop wholesome qualities of mind, amongst them qualities like garavo, reverence, nivato, humility, garavocha, nivatocha, santuti, contentment, katanyuta, gratitude, kanti, patience, sovachasa, kanti, sovachasata, that is being willing to listen to others and accept advice from others. So those are also parts of Dhamma practice. And I've given series of lectures on the Mahamangala Sutta. I'm not sure if any of those are on YouTube, but there was a friend and student of mine who came to my course, to a course that I gave in the New York Insight Meditation Center. I think it was 2017, and he took extensive notes on my lectures. And then he wrote the book on the Mangala Sutta, which has been published recently, explaining how to apply the principles of the Mangala Sutta to everyday life. His name is Doug Smith, Doug Smith. I don't remember the name of the book, but if you search, let me do a quick search online, actually.
And the book of early Buddhist wisdom.
Gotcha. Can you say that again? Early Buddhist wisdom.
Yeah, say it again. The person who said,
A handbook of earliest Buddhist
a
wisdom.
handbook of early Buddhist wisdom.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, a handbook of early Buddhist wisdom. Okay, do we have any other questions? I don't see other questions, and we have a little time. So let's see if we could take in another sutta.
Bhante, I have a
Oh,
question.
I see. Okay, I'm sorry. V,
Yes.
continue.
This may not. Recently, I guess that you may also have read about this metaverse. Say the Facebook is going to change the name to metaverse, and they are going into the idea of machine learning. So my question is this: I mean, with this machine learning, say for example, you're a participant in Facebook, even how well they will be able to capture your attitudes or your attributes is still within the human realm, right? Say 30 to 40 years, they couldn't be able to bring it forward. Can the machine actually be able to duplicate your personality, your person attributes, bring it forward to say to have a certain qualities of say, for example, Kanti, or just now what you said about the Mangala Suttas?
Yeah,
So
I don't think machines, even machines that have programmed for artificial intelligence, will have the subjective quality of mind. So they don't really have those qualities. They're just machines which are programmed in certain ways, maybe very complex and sophisticated ways, so they could display modes of behavior that look like, that match those qualities. But I don't see how a machine can have what we would call the internal subjective perspective that a human mind has.
But even if they go into the level of quantum mechanics, the subatomic level, they wouldn't be able to get that?
I
I
don't, I'm very, very doubtful, but I'm not in any way an expert in this area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bhante. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll just do one little part of the next sutta, which strikes me as a bit curious, because it seems to be not true. It doesn't agree with my experience. So here a Brahmin named Vasakara, who's actually the chief minister of the lodge state of Magadha, comes to the Buddha and says, can a bad person know of a bad person? This one is a bad person. And then the Buddha says, it's impossible that a bad person can know of a bad person. This fellow is a bad person. Then he continues, can a bad person know of a good person? This one is a good person. The Buddha says, impossible, can't happen. Okay, can a good person know of a good person? This one is a good person. The Buddha says, possible. Then can a good person know of a bad person? This one is a bad person. The Buddha says, it's possible. So the good person can know who is bad and who is good, but a bad person can't know who is bad and who is good. And then the Brahmin Vasakara, when the Buddha says this, he goes, it's wonderful, it's amazing how well this has been stated by Master Gautama. Then he repeats the whole thing. But it seems to me, I mean, I've been a simple, innocent person, maybe considering myself not perfect in all respects, but on the whole, a good person. But I've been ripped off, cheated, deceived, misled quite a few times by somebody who came onto me appearing to be a nice fellow, praising me, speaking nicely to me, showing that they want to help me, displaying a very pleasing demeanor. And yet when our interaction came to a final end, I came to realize that that was a bad person who sized me up and thought, this guy, he's a good person, but simple, trusting, honest, innocent. He's an easy one to rip off. And I've also heard that when a bad person meets another bad person, they know, this guy is a crook, just like myself. We could team up and make a very effective team together. So what do you think about this? Yeah, I just don't know what to make of it. It seems if we interpret the Buddha's words here the way they seem to mean, it seems that they're wrong.
I mean, a crook can think that being a crook is a good thing because he's getting away and making some sort of gain out of being a crook. But then he doesn't realize that it's actually a bad thing to do.
No, but still, when one crook meets another with a little, even sometimes with their eye, they could know who is a schemer, who is a crook, and then they'll know either to compete with that guy or to collaborate with them, to work together to cheat others. Let's say somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Wesley?
Thank you, Bhante. What I was going to say about this sutta so far is that it's kind of weird in the sense that it kind of seems like it closes off the Dhamma for a vast majority of people. Because then if that's true, that a bad person can't know a good person, then it's almost as if someone who is, steeped in unwholesome karma and whatnot cannot recognize the good path of the Dhamma and therefore cannot pursue it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah.
This just doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, I just don't know what to say about this passage. Let's see. Well, I could take only one more comment, then I'm going to have to go up for the meal. So we'll take Tim. You unmute.
Bhante, I agree with you that the sutta isn't necessarily represent reality. Where I'll quote P.T. Barnum.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a sucker born every minute, and I think that people that have bad intentions can clearly identify someone with good intentions or bad intentions.
Yeah, it seems so. Yeah, it could be that there's some underlying intent of this statement or of this passage, which I'm not able to catch. But if we take it literally, it's pretty difficult to accept on face value.
Yeah.
Okay, you could read on your own the rest of the sutta, which is rather opaque to me because it seems to be concerning some events taking place in the Buddha's time. And the events that are described are supposed to support the statement of the Buddha, so that it ends with, again, with the Brahman Vasakara on the basis of this incident, praising these words of the Buddha. Okay, we're going to have to end here, and I'm going to share the merit, and then we'll stop. And thank you all for joining. And next weekend, we won't be having the sutta class, but I will be having the 2-day Abhidharma program through the collaboration of BAUS, the Buddhist Association here, and Dharma College in Berkeley, California. And I'll be treating the chapter 8 in the Manual of Abhidharma on dependent origination and the system of conditional relations in the Abhidharma. If you've already registered for the Abhidharma program, you don't have to register again. You will be getting the announcement automatically. If you haven't yet registered, you can go to the website of BAUS and you'll find the Abhidharma panel. And that if you go to register, then it will direct you to Dharma College. Or you can go directly to Dharma College in Berkeley, California, and register through their website. Then you'll get the Zoom link for joining the class or the program. And it's Saturday and Sunday, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. And if you're not able to join in person, you could still register, and then you'll get the links to the recordings later. Okay, so I'm going to recite the verse, just a short verse for sharing the merits. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang. Okay, so thank you again, everybody, for joining.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Have a glorious day.
Thank you very much.